Welcome to the Blind Apex Podcast, where amateur club racers tune in to get faster.
I'm your host, Con Jonturk, and on this episode of the Blind Apex Podcast, I will readily admit I'm over my head. We're talking thermodynamics and racing. Joining me, proud father, another husband batting out of his league, pizza artist, venison jerky aficionado, lover of things four wheels and two, super nerd, reporting from the lab in his basement, Marc B. Welcome to the show, man.
Hey, nice to see you again. I haven't seen you in a while, and glad to be on here and I guess nerd out, but hopefully combine two passions here.
Yes, hopefully we can nerd out, because I didn't go to a really good school. I mean, it wasn't a...
JMU's pretty good.
It was good then, I guess, but I didn't study the same things you studied, let's say. So I don't...
Fair enough.
Yeah. This is not my forte for sure. So I appreciate you coming on and sharing your wisdom and knowledge on all of this.
Cool.
So, Marc, let's get a little bit of your two-wheel, four-wheel passion background, and then a little bit of your education so people understand where you're coming from.
Sure. So, been always into motorsports. Grew up, my dad did a lot of sand car stuff, so out in the sand dunes. So grew up doing that. Those are mainly like, old VW based, but tube frame kind of stuff. Then post college started getting into like HPT, high performance driving, HPD, whatever, high performance driving
Right.
school. Mainly with BMW CCA. Did for a bunch of years there. So 30, 40 track days there. At the time was running a BMW M3, then an Audi S4, then Mitsubishi Eclipse GSX that I did a bunch of stuff to and then blew up.
As they all do.
So
They all blow up.
As they all do, but they're phenomenal. I would still have that car. It sounds like a TIE fighter on meth. So did that. Then started getting into bike stuff. Started riding 2000. So I'm 46. So started riding in 2000. Moved down here to DC in 2004. Met Con in 2006.
Somewhere in there. Motorcycles, coffee.
That's a long time ago.
Hooligan nights, all those things.
17 years ago. Then along there, did a bunch of motorcycle track days, raced with CCS for a bit. So did a bunch of two-wheel stuff there. Haven't ridden in 4 years. Current four-wheel, fun car is a Nissan GTR. Current bikes include a Ducati.
New
Honda,
GTR, not like a
etc.
34, 33, right? Like
I'm waiting for the day I can get a 34. Okay. So that I think is 3 years they click over into show and display. So I'm eagerly awaiting the time when I can get one of those. When I do for the DSM for the Eclipse, I did a lot of my own work on that. So motor and everything like that. Did a lot of thermal management on it because they tend to explode. So this is a lot of heat management on there, which was always fun. So worked on my own stuff most of the time. Have a pretty nice shop to do that kind of stuff. I guess educationally, so I went to MIT, undergrad and grad school. So have degrees in aerospace engineering, nuclear engineering, a couple of degrees in nuclear engineering. Worked on nuclear reactors, fusion stuff, spaceships, all across the board. Got to work for a lot of cool places like Los Alamos, working on nuclear things that I can't talk about. Worked for a variety of other government places, doing a lot of stuff I can't talk about. But mainly got to work on a lot of lasers and spaceships and sensors and all kinds of crazy stuff. And kind of took a lot of that and applied it to hobbies in the past. So I've taught a few classes here and there, including I did a seminar at WPI up in Massachusetts on technology and motorsports. So this is talking about this stuff is old hat. So and fun to do
Good,
that.
because you're going to have to help me get through this because I don't know what I'm talking about. So,
well, then there
we're talking thermodynamics. So, can you give us layman's basics?
Yeah, thermodynamics is one of those things where everyone always thinks of it as hard but it's not. We all use it and we all do stuff with it without kind of even knowing. It's only when you try and throw a lot of terminology and everything into it that it gets hard. Like there's, 4 laws of thermodynamics, 0, 1, 2, and 3. And we'll go through all the ones that they mean. There's a 0 because they started with 1, 2, and 3, and then we're like, oh, cool, except we didn't define something. So we have to go back, and rather than renumber everything, they just kind of added a 0.
Okay.
So, but they're all things where they can make them both really hard, really complex, or actually really easy. So if you start with 0, the 0th law of thermodynamics is there exists a thing called temperature. Okay, so it's pretty easy. Like we can get that one. Basically, what that means is there's such a thing as hot and cold. Okay. The most important thing there is if two things are the same temperature, then they're in equilibrium with each other.
Okay.
Okay. So basically, everything in the universe is trying to like become in equilibrium with other things. Okay. Like, and which gets us on to like the first law of thermodynamics, which is conservation of energy. Basically, like the total amount of energy that exists stays the same. Okay, it just changes forms, like from electricity into heat in a heater, or from chemical energy in gasoline into mechanical energy in an engine, et cetera, et cetera. So basically, the 0th law is there exists a thing called temperature. Okay, the first law is basically there exists a thing called energy, and it can't be created or destroyed. It just can change forms from one thing to another. So if you look at it like, putting it in like a car engine kind of context, temperature is an obvious one. Like I said, what they did is they did 1, 2, and 3, and we're like, oh crap, we didn't define temperature. 0th law, there's temperature. Okay, so if you think about it from a car perspective, like you have chemical energy and gasoline, so it's just there. Now, technically speaking, that energy came from sunlight landed on the planet, plants turned the sunlight into chemical energy. Animals ate that, died, turned into oil, et cetera. That kind of whole process. Okay. So it went from, light energy and sunlight to chemical energy in plants and animals, eventually turning into more concentrated into, oil, turning into gasoline. But then when you burn it in a car engine, you're turning the chemical energy into mechanical energy, spinny stuff, and heat energy. And that heat is both in the exhaust gases as well as into the cylinder walls and then into the cooling system of the car. And this brings us on to the second law of thermodynamics, which is that the technical thing is entropy of an isolated system always increases. That's a really hard way of saying that, like, heat flows. Okay. The first law, basically, like, heat flows from one place to another. And second law, heat always flows from hot to cold. Okay. In effect, what that means is like entropy is you can think of as disorder. But in a second law case, basically, the energy will always move in a direction that increases the disorder of the system. Basically, it makes the energy less good. Like if you think about it, the hotter something is, the more useful stuff you can do with it. Okay. And the colder something is, the less useful stuff you can do with it. Like there's more energy in the system and it's at a higher state. A good way to look at this is an electric heater. Okay, electricity is a very kind of, you can think of it as like a very ordered state of energy. You can turn it into other things very efficiently, but going the other way is harder. Like I can make electricity into heat, just a heater, at effectively 100% efficiency. Like the energy just turns into heat. That's where kind of it all wants to go. But turning heat into electricity is much harder. Like you need an engine or things of that nature. And the third law is basically the entropy always increases in the universe until everything kind of gets as cold as it possibly can go. So that's kind of the nerd form of like, here are all the different laws of thermodynamics and everything. But what it really all boils down to is, and there's a joke that says like, when it comes to thermodynamics, you can't win. You can't even break even. It'll always get worse. Okay. So in effect, like, you're always, whenever you turn one form of energy into another, you're always losing something along the way. Okay. And typically that's referred to as entropy, which is basically just disorder. Another way to look at this is, let's say you have a container that you divide in two. So you have two sides of a box and you have a wall down the middle. If you have a bunch of gas or liquid on one side of that wall and nothing on the other side, that system has order. The liquid's on one side, nothing is on the other. If you pull that wall out, the liquid will or gas will flow from one side to the other and eventually equilibrate in both places. Now, if you think about it, there's now more disorder. It's more averaged out. There isn't high concentration and low concentration. It's just smeared out. That's what ends up happening is you can also extract energy from that process. So this is how, like, hydroelectric dams work. The water is up high. You let the water down low. Eventually, the water would reach the same level, but in that process, you can extract energy out of it. So that's how everything works. We're basically turning energy from one form to the other. Typically, when it comes to heat engines or cars, which are effectively heat engines, you're burning something to make stuff hot, and then you're taking that hotter thing, extracting energy out of it so that on average it becomes cooler and is now mixing with the outside world. So look at it at a car engine. I take gasoline, a very high concentration form of chemical energy. I burn it with air inside the cylinder at high pressure and temperature. So, I top dead center, ignite the fuel. Now I have really hot, high pressure gas, exhaust gases, and that pushes down on the piston, thereby expanding, lower pressure, cooling down, it's cooling off. And then the exhaust valve opens. So I've now extracted energy out of it. Now the exhaust valve opens. That exhaust blows out the exhaust pipe, eventually mixing with the outside air, and it all becomes room temperature. So I've gone from highly concentrated chemical energy to high pressure, high temperature gas. Then I'm having that gas coming into equilibrium with the universe as a whole by expanding. I'm extracting energy out of it in my engine, and then expanding further out the exhaust pipe and into the atmosphere, eventually reaching the same temperature and pressure as the outside world. So it's kind of coming into equilibrium with everything is the process and then I'm extracting energy out of it along the way. If I just take that gasoline and burn it in a dish, the same thing happens. That chemical energy becomes heat and high pressure gas that then expands out in the atmosphere, but I haven't extracted any useful work out of it.
Right.
So if you hear engineers or scientists say work, what they mean is literally work being done. It's pushing down on a piston. It's turning a thing. You're doing useful work, and that's where the energy is coming from. Interesting anecdote. That's a fun way to look at this, of how everything goes into equilibrium, is we're going to talk about, I'm going to extend this into a 30-second digression.
Go for it.
When you look at a nuclear bomb going off, okay? So three times, twice in anger, once in test, a lot of times in test. If you could freeze time at the instant the nuclear bomb is done doing its nuclear bomb thing, but so all the nuclear stuff has all happened, and you froze time and looked at it, it would look exactly the same as when it started. The bomb hasn't come apart yet. All it is now is basically a couple tens of pounds, hundreds of pounds thing the size of a basketball. That's 150 million degrees. Okay, it's just a ball of stuff that's 150 million degrees. The whole explosion process is just that ball of hot stuff cooling down and coming into equilibrium with the rest of the world. It's expanding, it's cooling, it's radiating energy. All the explodey part is just a ball of stuff the size of a basketball that's 150 million degrees cooling down. So now, theoretically, you could get useful work out of that. You could have the world's most ginormous piston and use it driven by a nuclear bomb. But, it's a lot easier to do it much slower, in a reactor kind of thing. Right. So anyway, interesting digression. So is that kind of a good start to why this matters?
Yeah, I think so. Specifically with creating that, well, not creating, but the use of the energy in how we typically see it, right? So we are making that car with the gas goes, piston runs, car goes forward. We have to do things like try to balance that engine working over time. So we have the radiator system, we have ventilating systems, things like that. And then down the road, we can work on it. We can work out the whole progression, but even your braking system has thermodynamic properties where you're actually like slowing down the energy that's going forward.
So that's a good way to look at it. So let's look at your typical internal combustion engine. Okay. Most internal combustion engines nowadays are between, on a low end, about 20%, and on a high end, about 35% efficiency. Okay. So what that means is, of the chemical energy that's in the fuel, gasoline, diesel, whatever, only about 20 to 30+% of it gets turned into the mechanical power of the engine. Okay. Typically, on most engines, about 15 to 20% of it turns into heat that's transported into the engine mass itself. So this is why you have a cooling system, whether air-cooled or water-cooled. So that's because you have hot gas in the cylinder, it's touching stuff, okay, and the heat is flowing from that really hot gas into the walls of the head, into the cylinder head, or into the walls of the cylinder, or into the piston, and all those things get hot. So in order to keep, and now exhaust gas was very much hot enough to melt an engine. Like if you make a gasoline torch, you can melt aluminum and steel with it, so it'll melt the engine if you don't get rid of that heat. So you'll have either air-cooled or water-cooled. A lot of times, like, the reason why water-cooled can typically yield higher power for a given amount of engine size is water's a lot better at carrying away heat than air. You can think of this, a really good way to think about this is, solids are typically best at carrying away heat unless they're flowing. Liquids are next best, gases are the worst. Way to look at this is, like, you can take air out of a hairdryer, which will be several hundred degrees Fahrenheit, and put your hand in front of it and it won't burn you. Like, the amount of heat transfer from the air to your hand is relatively low, even though the air can be very hot. You can open up an oven and hold your hand in an oven, and there's 200-300 degrees, and it probably won't burn you. Don't do it.
Yeah,
but,
we're not recommending that.
We're not recommending that. But like the air coming out of a hairdryer can be extremely hot. Okay. Now, if you take even 160, 170 degree water, like out of a coffee maker, it will burn you. It will burn the hell out of you. Okay. And it's because the water not only contains more energy per unit amount of stuff, but it can transfer that energy into you much faster.
Okay.
Another good way of looking at this, and so this is like the concept of insulation. Like, if you get out of the shower and you stand on tile floor, the floor feels really cold. If you stand on a rug, it doesn't feel cold. Both the rug and the floor are the exact same temperature. It's just that your body, you feel like you don't feel something being cold. You feel heat leaving you and going into it. And since the rug is insulating from a thermal perspective, the heat can't leave your body as fast. So even though the rug and the floor are the same temperature, one will feel colder. Okay. So this is where stuff actually gets kind of counterintuitive in a lot of cases, especially when it comes to like cooling cars. But before we get down that path, the other 50%, 60% of the heat that is in the energy that's in the initial like fuel goes out the tailpipe. Okay. So this is just hot gas. Like, the exhaust coming out of the car is extremely hot, and it's actually at higher pressure. Otherwise it wouldn't flow out the exhaust pipe. So this is why turbos are a unique thing. In effect, what a turbocharger is doing is capturing some of the energy that would normally be lost in the exhaust and putting it back into the engine in the form of more compressed intake air. Okay? Now, this can be done to an extremely high degree of efficiency. A good example of which is in a turbocharger, you have, a turbine and a compressor, and the exhaust is spinning, forcing the turbine to spin, and which spins the compressor and forces air into the engine. Back in the turbo era of Formula One, back in like the 1980s, the amount of horsepower in the shaft of the turbo, so think of like the amount of energy being turned from exhaust gas energy into compressed intake charge, was 800 to 1,000 horsepower of the 1,200 to 1,400 horsepower of the car. In effect, the engine part was effectively the power turbine, and the vast majority of the like power was being generated in the turbo. Interestingly enough. So like so all that energy would normally have been wasted.
Okay.
Effectively. They were using the engine as kind of like a power turbine and gas generator would be the gas turbine equivalent of it. But those were horrifyingly crazy. But you can think of this as like, look at like modern cars, like if you're doing drag race or anything like that, you can take a normally aspirated car and get 3 to 4 times the horsepower out of it via turbocharging.
Right.
Like there are 2-liter Hondas out there that are drag racing that, it's a 250 horsepower stock engine that's making 1,200 horsepower on a drag strip, turbocharged.
Right.
Now that energy is coming from somewhere, and in effect, like a lot of it is like through the turbocharger. So this is why like thermal management in a car is so important. Is the more energy that you can get into the mechanical side instead of in the heat, whether it be heat in the cooling system or heat going out the exhaust, or try and recover that with the turbo, for instance, the more efficient the car can be, but also the more power you can get out of a given amount of fuel.
Okay.
And more importantly, a given amount of air. So the vast majority of internal combustion engines are air limited, not fuel limited. As in, it's getting air into the engine that is determining how much fuel you can burn.
Correct.
Okay, you can't just keep throwing fuel into it and it'll keep, you'll just get increasingly rich and crappy. So that's why everything is about whether, intake performance, putting an intake on a car, improving exhaust performance. It's all about just getting more air into the engine and then adding the necessary fuel in order to take advantage of that. But
right. The air density, though, how much does that play into it? I mean,
a lot. Okay. I mean, it's total amount of mass of air that you're putting in. So this is why, like, if you've ever looked at, you'll have like an air mass sensor. The engine doesn't care what temperature, really, for the most part. It does a little bit, but to first order, the engine doesn't care what temperature the air is going in or what pressure it is. All it cares is, how many pounds per minute of air is going into the engine, and then you're burning that with a given amount of fuel.
Right.
So air fuel ratio is always done in mass. So it's, pounds of air per pound of gasoline in terms of air fuel ratio. And so like if you have an air fuel meter or exhaust gas sensor, you can do these kinds of things or try and get like the right ratio of air to fuel. So a lot of cars will have mass air sensors to actually directly measure the amount of air going into the car. Others will have volumetric flow sensors, and they have to use temperature and volumetric flow and pressure in order to back out how much mass there is. Right. And then given that amount of mass, you squirt in the right amount of fuel. So, like air pressure does matter. And just in terms of getting the air in. So a really good example of that is Pikes Peak before it was dominated by electric cars, basically. And that's one of the reasons why it's a good example for that is, so at Pikes Peak, there's close to a mile of elevation change through the course of the race. And at the top, the air pressure is, I think, like 70% of what it is at the bottom, 70 or 80%, meaning you're getting, for the same amount of volume going in, you're only getting 70, 80% of the air. So there's less air for you to burn. Right. So this is why with turbocharged cars, if you're a turbo, like your wastegate and your control on the turbo is based on absolute pressure. Okay. So you're trying to put a constant amount of pressure into the engine, regardless of what it started with. So turbocharged cars will tend to do very well at Pikes Peak because at the bottom of the mountain, they're putting the same amount of air into the engine as at the top of the mountain. The turbo's having to work harder because it has to compress more low pressure air, but the air going into the engine, same pressure, top and bottom. Electric car doesn't have to worry about that because the air part is gone. But we'll stick with internal combustion for now. So yeah, great question that the air pressure matters. So one of the things that's really important about that and how this kind of relates to like the thermal part of it is, not only do you want to get the heat out of the engine, you want to use as much of that heat as possible. And one of the key aspects of this is like, in order to get the air in, you also have to get the exhaust out. Okay. So here's like, kind of a good question. Like, is the only like people, you'll see people that'll like do exhaust wrap on engines, like on the exhaust. One of the reasons for that is to keep your engine bay cooler, is an obvious thing. And there's certain reasons for doing that. Okay. But the other reason is actually to retain heat in the exhaust itself, because that the heat and energy in the exhaust is what's pushing it out the back end of the car.
Okay.
Like it has to expand out the exhaust. So the more heat you can keep in the exhaust, the faster the exhaust will leave, meaning the less exhaust back pressure there will be, and the more air you can put in the front of the engine and make more power. So there's multiple reasons for doing those kinds of things. But keeping exhaust energy in the exhaust and not in everything else is generally helps from a volumetric flow perspective.
Okay. Yeah, I was actually going to ask about that, because I have let's say my engine bay retains too much heat, right? I've already wrapped my header. I want it to shoot out the gas as much as possible. My engine's loves air, more air. They all do, but this one really loves air. So we have to choke it out. We have to take timing out of it to keep me, legal for the class. But when I come off the track, my intake manifold in the front, which is 2 inches from my radiator, you cannot touch it. It will scald your hand. Now,
that's not good.
So this is a nut I'm trying to crack this winter. So, yeah.
Okay. So that's one of the things is like how, like, there's a variety of different ways to manage heat. And this goes at any level of motorsports. This is actually one of the big bugaboos for just design of cars in general. And even manufacturers with tons of effort into this screw up. Okay. A perfect example of this is the B5 Audi S4. Okay. So this is the 2000 through 2003 or 4. It was S4, the 2.7 liter twin turbo S4. I had one. That thing ate turbos for breakfast. Didn't matter. Bus stock, chip, didn't matter. I actually took Audi to court on it. But long story for another day. And one of the reasons why is they put the turbos between the engine and the firewall. Okay. And turbochargers love to just cook oil and then fry bearings if they run too hot.
Right.
Okay. So the obvious place you'd want to put something that's really temperature sensitive is sandwiched between the hot engine, the firewall, and have it run exhaust through it. So it can't possibly ever be cold. Right. So that's what they did. And it fried turbos left and right. The really fun part was that same motor was used in the Audi Allroad, which at the time was based on the A8 chassis, so much bigger. And so thus, instead of the turbos being right between the engine bay and the firewall, there was like 3-4 inches of room all around them. And those things never fried turbos. Didn't matter if you chipped them or not. And it was all about heat management in it. So manufacturers put a lot of effort into trying to get heat out of the engine bay so you just don't cook components. Right. Remember that a lot of the electronic components are in there as well. And electronics tend to not like being baked continuously.
No, they're pretty sensitive to that stuff over time.
Yeah. So there's a lot of work that has to be done on that. Even to the extent where if you look at like thermal management all the way up to like Formula One, where they're very limited. Like for instance, Formula One cars don't like to stand still. They're like sharks because since they're not allowed radiator fans, because people in the past made really big radiator fans that also functioned as downforce generators. So you're not allowed to have fans on a Formula One car because people in the past turned those into suction cars and therefore no radiator fans. So if you basically you can't make power and not be moving, like they will destroy themselves very, very fast. So there's a lot of effort getting put into heat management. Basically, you want the heat in the gas and not anywhere else. Okay. And people go to extreme lengths on this. Even to doing weird combustion chamber coatings, or you'll see the people will do PVD coatings on top of pistons and stuff like that, just to keep heat in the exhaust. Now, those things help. Basically, anything you can do to keep the heat in the gas flow and not in the motor will help. The intake manifold thing is weird. what was done before, like your version of the car, like, and I think Con and I were talking about this before the podcast, was like back in the B series motors, the engine was the other way, and the exhaust manifold was in the front of the engine, right behind the radiator, and the intake was in the back. Now, that still allowed a lot of heat soak into the intake, and almost every front-wheel driver, transverse engine, all-wheel drive car at the time ran that configuration, and since then, a lot of them went the other way. One of the advantages of that was if you look down through the engine bay, there's a big gaping hole under the exhaust manifold underneath the car. So any airflow going through the radiator goes through the radiator. The air gets a little bit warmer, but not that bad, and then blows right over the exhaust manifold and out the bottom of the car. Okay, so while the intake manifold would get a bunch of heat, it wouldn't get that much heat. Okay, now the radiator can be quite hot. So like while the intake manifold you don't want to be, it will never be as hot as the exhaust manifold. It'll still be the temperature of the air coming out of the radiator. It's still hot. Okay, I mean, think about your radiator temperature is 220, 240 degrees Fahrenheit. Like it'll burn you. Like, and you definitely don't want your intake manifold being that hot. So how do you get the heat out of like where it belongs and not where it doesn't belong in the car? And we can get into this at kind of at whatever degree of kind of we want. But do you want to go down that path, or do you want to do more on kind of how heat flows around things and what you want to do on that? Or do you want to just kind of riff down the like specific?
Let's go down the specific example because I'm selfish, and then we'll see what we can do otherwise.
Okay. Okay. So the reason why in this case, why your intake manifold is hot is right behind the radiator. The radiator's hot, especially after a session. While you think about it, like say you got a cold air intake, which I hope, so you're sucking in nice cold out. But if you think about it, the amount of air that's going through your engine is small compared to the amount of air going through the radiator.
Right.
Okay. And the way you can think about this as a good example is the air that goes into your engine goes in, ambient temperature and comes out at 1,000 degrees. The air that goes into the radiator goes in at ambient temperature and comes out at 250 degrees. Okay. Remember how I said that the amount of energy in the exhaust is about the same as the amount of energy going into the cooling system as well as into the actual engine. Right. Okay. So the same amount of air, like if you take 5 pounds of air and put the same amount of energy into it, it'll go up some amount of temperature. If you put twice as much energy in, the rate change in temperature will be twice as much. So the air that, say it's a 100-degree day, nice, warm, humid Virginia day, and like the air goes into the radiator at 100 degrees and comes out at 200. Okay, so 100-degree increase. The air that goes into the engine goes in at 100 degrees and comes out at 1,000 degrees, 900-degree difference. Now, that exhaust gas only contains twice as much energy as the air going through the radiator picked up. Okay, so, but the air doesn't go into so you would need basically 4.5 times as much air going through the radiator than going through the engine. Okay. From an airflow, just mass perspective. Okay. So what that means is your intake manifold is basically getting blasted with 4.5 times as much hot air from the outside as the amount of cold air going through the inside.
Okay.
So there, the heat flow is into the intake manifold from the radiator air surrounding it. Because if you look in the engine bay, it's basically radiator, intake manifold, which is, nowadays either like a peak plastic or a lot of times or
aluminum. Yeah.
What it's going to be. Cool. Well, good and bad. It actually probably would get less hot if it was plastic. So interestingly enough. So aluminum is a really good conductor of heat. So you're probably warming your intake charge more with a hot metal intake manifold than you are with a hot plastic intake manifold, because I'm pretty sure the stock one's plastic.
Yeah, not on my car, right? But on some of them they were. Yeah.
Oh, really? Interesting. So there, in that case, like the problem you have isn't basically like the heat from the exhaust that's cooking your intake manifold. It's the heat from the radiator that's cooking your intake manifold, and also from the engine and just hot parts around there. But dominantly, it's from the radiator. And this is probably why it almost doesn't matter the ambient air temperature. Your intake manifold will still be hot because the air coming out of the radiator is going to be hot. Now, if you're not flogging the crap out of the car, your intake manifold will stay nice and cool. Because the amount of the air, like say you're only running at 25% throttle all the time. Okay. You're going to be slow, but you won't cook your intake manifold. But in effect, like only a quarter of the amount of heat is going into the air coming out of the radiator. So now instead of going from 100 degrees going in and 240 coming out, it'll be 100 degrees going in and like 140, 160.
Okay.
So it'll be a lot cooler air, and thus the amount of air going into the engine is going to be also, cooler. So there's a couple of things you can do. One is get the heat out of the engine bay. Okay. Preferably not via the intake manifold. Okay. So this is why some kind of weird things that you always see, like, I've seen people put like hood vents on a car and have them face the wrong way.
Okay.
Okay. So you have to look at like air likes to flow from high pressure regions to low pressure regions. Okay. So a good way to think about this is like, if you ever seen, it's on usually on older muscle cars where they had what was called cowl induction.
Right.
Okay. So it looks like a big thing on top of the hood, but the inlet was back. It was back by the windshield. It wasn't in the front where you'd think it would be. It was this big thing coming up. And the reason why is when the air comes over the hood and makes that corner by the windshield, it builds up there. So there's actually a high pressure region right at the base of the windshield, and that sucks in. So like you're basically it's the same as like a ram air kind of thing, but going the other way. Okay. And the idea was like, well, you get drag every time you make air change direction. So why not just use that high pressure air that created the drag and use it to get more air into the engine? So that's one way of doing it. But what that means is if you see people with like extractor vents on the hood that are close to the windshield, they're not working. Like they're not doing what they need to do.
Right.
Like because the air will go in because the engine bay is actually a region of low pressure. Okay, because the air has to squeak through the radiator, and anytime, remember, it goes from high pressure to low pressure, so the air inside the engine bay is going to be cooler or less dense than the air outside of it. Okay, which is why the air flows out of the engine bay underneath the car and also into the wheel wells in a lot of cases. So basically, anytime like you make an air change direction, it's going to be higher pressure on the inside of that corner and lower on the outside of the corner as a kind of way to think about as the air moves. So what you want to extract air from the engine bay, one way to do that is basically a reverse facing scoop at the front of like right behind the radiator at the front of the hood. Okay. So like, because if you have like a reverse facing scoop, it's a region of even lower pressure and it'll suck air out of the scoop. Okay. Kind of the opposite way you would want it to, if you were doing like a ram air thing. The other thing is to actually so that's one way to get more air out from the engine bay. Because if you think about it, if you double the amount of airflow through the radiator, okay, the change in temperature will be half as much. Okay. So, which means that the air hitting your intake manifold will also be half as, well, it'll go from like 100 to 160 instead of from 100 to 220. Okay. So that's a good thing to do. There's two really easy ways to do that. Okay, one is cut a hole in the hood with a reverse facing scoop, because if it's not reverse facing, you'll get air going in, which will dilute the hot air, but you want the hot air to leave. You want more air through the radiator so the overall air is less hot. Because what you're having right now is, think of the air not moving very well. Like in that tortuous area between the radiator and the engine, there's pipes, there's all kinds of stuff in the air. The air's not moving very fast. It's kind of floating around. Okay. Meaning the intake manifold is sitting in a sea of hot air. Like you want to either blow cold air into that area or get that hot air out as fast as possible so that the overall temperature decreases.
Yeah. So
the other way is a front air dam. Like if you look at a lot of stock vehicles, they will have a vertical air dam sticking down from under the front lip. That is so they don't overheat. Okay, what that does is that air dam, in the same way like a gurney flap on a wing does, it basically makes a low pressure region behind it so that the air gets sucked out the bottom of the car. Okay. So, but you probably have a pretty extended front splitter, I think, on your car.
It's not really a big splitter because of the rules for me. I do have a good air dam. What I was going to do, I have hood louvers in the front. We measured the pressure zones on the hood in 6-inch squares. I found the best place to put it, so I put it there. But one of the big things for me was I need...
Like the highest pressure area or the lowest pressure area?
I think it's the highest pressure area on the hood.
So flow into the louvers?
No, out of the louvers. So it must have been the low pressure area of the hood.
Okay.
But what I'm going to do is put like a gurney on the front to help create that swirl, because I don't think it's being super efficient right now. So that's one thing I'm going to do to help.
The other thing is,
go ahead.
You could stick a like backwards pointing nacoduct.
Oh, okay.
So you know what an aqueduct, like the hourglass shape. So nacoducts are really good at pulling in boundary layer flow or exhausting boundary layer flow. Like if you have a laminar flow over the hood, which it is before it gets tripped. So near the front of the hood is an ideal place for nacoducts, either inlet ones or exhaust ones, depending which way they're facing. Okay. So reverse facing nacoducts will actually add a significant amount of extraction without adding additional drag, like a gurney.
Okay.
Same with a reverse scoop, as opposed to like a gurney vertical.
Yeah, it's like a 1/4-inch gurney flap. I think I'm going to add just to try to help accelerate things in the front there and get it to start pulling out of the hood. The other thing is Honda was dumb and they routed a coolant line through my intake manifold. So I'm going to loop that, and I don't know why. It's not needed, but
they usually do that to increase fuel atomization, to basically make in cold start to make the intake air temperature higher quicker.
Right. So I don't need that. I don't have that problem.
You don't need that.
And then I literally, while we're on the podcast, the UPS just showed up to drop off my metal box pan brake and bead roller. So because I'm going to duct from like the air dam opening area to the radiator, just to help make the air getting to the radiator efficient. And then I'm on a plastic end tank aluminum radiator right now. It's the factory one. It says Honda on it, like whatever. And I have a full aluminum radiator, which, it's only single row, but the factory one was only single row. And as far as I'm concerned, I need surface area, not volume. So
yes and no. Okay. So a thing there. One thing to look at is kind of measure the pressure. I mean, if you were measuring pressure on your hood, you probably have, manometer kind of thing. Like, what you want to do is measure the pressure kind of before and after the radiator is a good thing to look at here. Because for most cases, your radiator inlet, especially for racing, your radiator inlet is too big.
Okay.
So it's like wrongly sized. Okay. In effect, like when you try and ram a lot of air through a radiator, the pressure drop gets much higher. So one of the things is kind of, you want the optimized duct size. So on this, and it's actually a lot smaller than you might think. Like, so think back to my DSM days. So every people in our age has seen the late 90s Generation 2 Mitsubishi Eclipse, like big fish, catfish mouth looking car. Okay. When I was running that on the track, the modified intake that I was doing for radiator, and bear in mind the car I was aiming for about 600-700 horsepower at the time. I was cutting the intake of the radiator down by a factor of 3. It was basically like a 2-inch tall strip for the radiator. Okay, at that point. Because what you want to do is you want to take a small amount of high-speed air, expand it so that it gets to the whole radiator, and then have it flow through the radiator at relatively low speed. Okay. Whereas if you try and just have a bunch of it and just ramming into it, the air doesn't have enough pressure to force that amount of air through it. So you actually get spillover. Right. Meaning the air will try and get into the mouth, but instead it's kind of stacking up and it'll get blown up over the top, meaning it'll be highly turbulent.
It takes the path of least resistance. That's why they CFD, because fluid does the same thing. Water does the same thing. So, yeah. So that's the plan. This car has it has an open grill and a lower radiator opening, and I'm gonna do some carbon work, I hope, to block off that upper grill area. Yeah.
Mouth.
Just so it's not dead air rattling against where the duct will be. The duct will be in the way anyway. So,
and then also do tufts or yarn or however you want to do it to make sure that, because if you can fill that in a little bit, you want to make sure that you can maintain that consistent laminar flow up over the front lip of the hood so that any aerodynamics or vents or whatever you do on the top of the hood don't get disturbed by.
Right. Yeah. So definitely going to do that too. So,
the other thing is, if you're making sheet metal stuff, is remember that the amount of airflow through the radiator isn't all that much, like on a grand scheme of things, is duct it down and out. Like if you have, your intake manifold, come out of the radiator and kind of do a thing like that, so the air, it's not blowing directly on the intake manifold.
Yeah, I have a heat shield setup that I'm doing in carbon because I'm a nerd and it doesn't absorb a lot of stuff. Heat, so.
It'll still get hot. It won't matter as long as it doesn't melt. But yeah, then, and also the other thing that's a good thing, I don't know how much you're allowed, is because the air is going to have to go somewhere. Ideally, what you would almost want to do if you were trying to deal with this kind of thing is try and get the air to go down and out the sides, like the radiator air. Like wheel wells are a good spot to put it.
Yeah, we don't.
If you can get out the side.
In theory, I can duct my radiator wherever I want. I cannot ventilate my wheel wells, though.
Wheel wells.
So, yeah. And I don't want to use that air to point at my. Well, I don't know. I'd have to measure the temperature, I guess, to then point it at my brakes.
On your brakes,
but
that won't matter. So again, okay, this is actually a good thing. So brakes are turning the kinetic energy of the car that you just put you turn gasoline into mechanical energy, use that to accelerate your car. Now it's got a whole bunch of kinetic energy, and the brakes are turning that back into heat,
right,
and then radiating it out. Okay, if the air hitting your brakes is 200 degrees instead of 100 degrees, it ain't going to matter a lick to the because your brakes are 800 to 1,000 degrees. Right. It's just, they see it as a cold breath of fresh air at that point. And also that it's not, it won't make a lick of difference. The big thing with cold air ducting for brakes is just to get more air. So when you see brake ducting, to front inlets on stuff on a car, it isn't to get cold to the brakes, it's to get air to the brakes.
Right.
Okay. So you're basically relying on the ram air flowing through that tube to just blow air onto the brakes. As long as you're not directing exhaust at the brakes, anything's better than just it sitting there. So I wouldn't worry too much about that.
Okay.
In terms of radiator air going there. The big thing is if you can duct the radiator somewhere, if you're putting it down, if you're getting it out the bottom of the car, okay, then that should work. But then you want your intake manifold to get air from somewhere else. Okay. This can be another duct. As long as if the radiator isn't directly blowing onto the intake manifold, it's not going to require that much air to keep the air around the intake manifold cool. You don't need, if there's no air in and out, if there isn't this, jet of hot air blowing onto it and you have that shielded off, it doesn't take much ambient air to just make that normal temperature.
Okay.
A lot better temperature. The other thing you could do is just insulate the crap out of your intake manifold. I see people header wrap all the time, and that's great. That actually a well-designed, you might get, really insulating a header and exhaust system, you might get maybe 1 or 2% more power out of the car just due to better flow, ironically. However, I very rarely see people insulate their intake manifolds, at which point, like, let's put it this way. If your intake, say the air going through your intake manifold got heated up to 160 degrees and instead of from 100 degrees. Okay, so like just the intake manifold warmed the air by 60 degrees. Okay, that would mean that that's about a 5 to 8% hit on power. There's that. Okay. So whereas the only way that heat's going into the intake manifold is from the outside. Okay. So if you reduce the heat flow into that intake manifold so that the amount of heat it only heated it to 130 instead of 160, you just gain back 2 to 3% power. Like just like that. So what's really funny is like go around next time you're into pits and stuff like that, you'll see everyone and their mom will insulate headers and stuff like that. And they'll have these nice, pretty aluminum intake manifolds just hanging out there getting hot. And it's like, you're putting cold air down the middle of it. You have a cold air intake. You just like, and then you're like cold air on the inside and super hot air on the outside.
Yeah.
You might as well just have a non-cold air intake and just suck in 100-degree air and you're probably just fine. So it's really fun. So like definitely what I was going to say is like, just insulate the crap out of the intake manifold.
Yeah, I'm looking at a couple products to do that because I'm going to have to pull it anyway because I'm going to do one of those replaceable isolator manifold gaskets, the intake manifold gaskets. So I'm going to do that, and then while it's off, there's this. It's a high heat bonded corrugated aluminum kind of thing that you can cut, shape, and put on, and then splice together. So,
okay,
yeah.
I was gonna say just header wrap would probably work, but like anything you can do, and there's usually a lot of room around intake runners and stuff like that. Just shove stuff around there. Just insulate the crap out of it.
Okay.
Like it will help. And then same with like any inlet ducting, like your cold air inlet ducting. Basically insulate the crap out of that. The other, and that's going to buy you more than anything else. Because now that it'll be cooled, that intake manifold will be there will be a lot less heat going into it, meaning there will be a lot less, remember heat goes from hot to cold. So there will be a lot less heat going into it from the ambient airstream around it, even if you didn't do any of your radiator ducting. And a lot less heat going from the intake manifold into the intake air charge.
Okay.
But, yeah, insulate it. And also, next time you're going around the pits, just look. You'll see.
Trust me.
Exhausts will always be wrapped, and intakes will never be wrapped.
Never wrapped.
And it's
never. They're usually shiny aluminum. They like polish them and stuff. They have a good time.
Which is... So the other thing, okay, so one of the, let's bring it back to thermodynamics. Okay, so heat moves 3 different ways, okay? Conduction, convection, and radiation. Conduction is obvious, heat goes from hot to cold thing. If you're holding an ice cube, the heat's going from your hand into the ice cube. Conduction, it's solid surfaces in contact with each other. That part's easy. So like when you talked about like your thermal isolator gasket, or usually they're like a phenolic standoff kind of thing,
right, between
the head and intake manifold. That's a good idea. Like a lot of heat can be moved by conduction, especially aluminum is very thermally conductive. You can tell this where if you ever have like a piece of aluminum, like aluminum TIG rod or something like that, hold onto it and put it on an ice cube. And like the heat will come out of your hand like super efficiently into the ice cube. Like you can cut through it. Like if you ever seen the like as seen on TV like defrosting thing, like you can put meat on this and it defrosts the meat and like it's just a freaking aluminum plate. That's all it is. It's an aluminum plate.
If you bought an aluminum cookie sheet, it's the same thing.
Yeah, like go buy some 6061 from McMaster. You're good to go. Like like clean the oil off. You're done. So isolating, the aluminum head from the aluminum intake manifold, because the head's going to be, it's got exhaust gas in it, it's got hot water in it. The head's whatever your coolant temperature is, or hotter. Okay, so doing that helps a bunch. And then so convection. So this is whenever you have air or water or any fluid moving over a surface, that gets the heat moves out of it more rapidly. Think about this as like blowing on food. Your food is just sitting there. If the air isn't moving around it, it's just conducting into air. and air is a poor conductor of heat. However, if you move the air over it, now a lot more heat can be extracted because it's like, new air blowing over it all the time.
Mm-hmm.
The last thing is radiation. Okay. So this isn't radiation like nuclear. This is the equivalent of a heat lamp. So like if you stand in front of a heat lamp and you feel the heat on your face,
Mm-hmm.
you're actually feeling infrared radiation. Everything emits some amount of infrared radiation. This is why, like, if you see like, thermal cameras on stuff like that, what you're actually seeing is the infrared light emitted by anything that's warm.
Right.
Now, so you'll see like coatings, like high emissivity coatings for things. If you've ever seen that term where it'll be like high E coating for this, like muffler paint is a good example of this, where what that does is that maximizes the amount of heat that can be emitted by radiation. As soon as you're above a few hundred degrees in air, radiation actually can put out more heat than convection. Okay. So this is why why those like heat lamp, radiative heaters work so well is, if you think about it, they're in air, but all the heat is coming out via the radiation part. The air flowing over it's not heating the room, it's heating you, kind of thing. Okay. So whenever you want to get heat into or out of something, like you have to look at like all those different aspects: conduction, convection, radiation. So in your case with your intake manifold, like that isolator gasket, you're eliminating the conduction part. You're basically keeping the thing you want cold physically separate from the thing you want hot. Okay. We already talked about the convection part. Like we don't want hot air blowing onto it. So you're ducting, or if you insulate it, that's a way to keep the hot air from hitting it directly. The last piece of it is radiation. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
In general with radiation is, again, heat goes from hot to cold always. So if you want something to not absorb a lot of radiation, or a lot of thermal radiation, you definitely don't want it to be black. Okay. Now, but like you also a lot of times don't want it to be shiny either. Okay. Like a good example of this is if you've ever like sat on a seatbelt that was sitting in a sunlit car.
Correct.
Okay. And it burns your ass because shiny things, they don't absorb a lot of light. I mean, think about it. They're reflective. Okay. But they really, really don't emit a lot of thermal energy. Okay. So shiny things basically like look hot. In fact, so I do a lot of long range shooting stuff.
Yep.
And one of the things, I also have like thermal scopes and stuff like that. The way you sight in a thermal scope is you use aluminum foil. Okay. Because aluminum foil will just be hotter than the target. So you can easily see aluminum foil on it. So that's one way to do it. So that shiny aluminum intake manifold is likely absorbing a lot of radiated heat from the engine and everything else around it. Okay. The ideal, what you want is white. Okay. White is the coolest color from a radiation perspective, because if you think about it, white is pretty reflective, like light bounces off of it. That's why it looks white. Okay. But from an infrared perspective, it's very emitting. Okay. Like it emits a lot of heat. At the temperatures in a car, it doesn't matter all that much. You just want to increase the emissivity. So like what you really don't want is you don't want it to be shiny. Okay. Everything else will make it cooler. Black, white. White is probably better, but black or white. This is why, like, if you ever see like advertisements for, ceramic coating, like high emissivity ceramic coatings for headers and stuff like that.
Yep.
Some of them will be black, some of them will be white. Like white is actually better. But you'll see people, they're like, well, isn't black better for blah, 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 blah. And when it comes to infrared, white and black are the same thing. Like they're the same. They're both equally dark when it comes to that. So, so shiny intake manifold, worse in every possible way, from a thermal perspective. So,
but it gets those show car points
be smart
for Instagram.
Oh yeah, that definitely makes you faster.
Yeah.
It's like sticker horsepower. Yeah. So, I think you got like a good path forward on the intake side of things. Like, I mean, move heat around. Do you have like a bunch of like remote read thermometers, like, cheapy ones?
No, I don't. I probably should get my hands on some.
Get like on Amazon, it'll be 10, $15. They're like, little temperature probe. They're cheap because it's not all that hot.
Right.
Okay. And worst case, you could put some wrap around it or whatever. Like, you just need something to read up to like, 200 degrees Fahrenheit. They'll come with like a 2-3 meter cord, like a little LCD thing or whatever. Like, put them in there. They're battery powered. Stick a row of them. Like, if the cord's not long enough to get into the, cockpit, like, right along the bottom of your hood, and just like see what it looks like, or data log it if you're that dorky, but you probably.
Yeah, I don't. I would be, but I'm not allowed to have that kind of data.
Can you have a thermometer display?
Oh yeah. I would data log things. I guess I could buy Haltech and do it, but
oh no, I'm saying just easier. Buy like freaking Arduino and do it that way. And
okay, yeah,
like Google like how to log temperature with Arduino, and follow instructions on like a $20 thing, and that are just like. And if you want after this, I can say it. Like what I use is there's you can get like a 2-pack for $20. It's like a little like 1x2 inch LCD screen and like a metal temperature probe on like a 2-3 meter cord.
Okay.
For a lot of times, like people use them for a variety of different random crap. They also like they make them on for like aquariums, but they also a lot of times they'll make them hot enough. They'll run hot enough to use in an oven.
Okay.
Like there'll be like a silicone cord and stuff like that. In which case, and then just put it. If you can't easily run the probe through like the firewall, you could just put them at like the base of your windshield on the outside, tape them down or something, and just look at it that way. And just, temperature, like, you probably can find out your intake air temperature if you're like can logging, are you allowed to? Like, can you do an OBD2 logger?
No, not technically, because I would have to upgrade my ECU to do it. That's it. That's the issue. Yeah.
Why?
The ECU setup that I have right now, I have to have plugged in because we have a rule that says I have to be logging through that.
But it's a stock ECU, right?
Yeah, but it's not logging that, I don't think. It might be.
Get an OBD2 like plug-in logger.
Yeah.
Like like an OBD2 diagnostic reader that you get for I assume like kind of thing. That'll like if the app logs, that'll log intake air temperature.
Okay, I'll have to look into it.
It'll be one of because Honda I mean it's probably changed, but does Honda use a mass air sensor or like a carbon vortex like airflow?
No, it's mass air, I think.
Airflow sensor, do you know? It'll still read intake air temperature because they'll have an ignition retard curve for that. But yeah, it'll have intake air temperature as one of the things on it. So if you can do OBD2 log, you can log it.
Okay. And
it's just a plug.
I can do those logs during my practice days, not necessarily race weekend. So.
Oh yeah. But yeah, so yeah, definitely like, and read have a temperature probe right next to the intake manifold on the outside. And then compare that to your intake air temperature. And I bet you like the air temperature around the intake manifold will surprise you. Like that's why it's hot.
Okay.
So it's because of the radiator. And then so that way you can like, quantitatively look at like your ducting and stuff like that and how that all changes.
Okay. Yeah.
I do appreciate like doing it in carbon fiber because, cool. Like as opposed to like aluminum.
Yeah, I do a lot of stuff in carbon. I
appreciate it.
I would do my buddy did his radiator ducting in carbon, but sometimes we bump draft ish intentionally and unintentionally, and I figured I'd want something to beat out if we bump too hard. Probably.
So do you is it like a wet layup or?
Yeah, I'm gonna do a wet lay on my. I'll do a wet lay on my grill, and then he did a wet lay on his ducting. So,
that's devotion.
Yeah. So we're running a little over an hour, but I had one question that I definitely wanted to cover, not for me, and it has to deal with brake sizing, like rotor sizing and heat dissipation. Mostly for my buddy. He just built a TSX, a newer TSX with a J series swap. He's got to weigh like 3,000 pounds. He's running big tires, like 295 square on it, I think.
Wait, a what swap into a TSX?
A J series, the V6 from like a Ridgeline.
Oh, okay. Like, okay, sure. Oh, okay.
Yes.
Is that a transverse motor?
Yes. It comes, yes, they make there's a J series transverse. Yes, it is.
For what? For the Ridgeline?
Accords, I think. Yeah, they were V6 Accords.
Oh yeah. Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Oh, that's going to be interesting.
Well, it's very interesting, and it's lunatic fast, right? Even at 3,000 pounds, like it's lunatic fast.
Yeah.
Stock engine, unbuilt, lunatic fast, but he destroys rotors.
He's destroying his brakes.
Yeah, his rotors are destroyed. And they're huge.
Is it stock right now or
no?
Oh.
He bought some from.
And he's still wrecking.
Oh yeah, from a company with racing and brakes in the name, and they sold him a kit, and I think he made 3 laps before he popped that rotor. It's a 2-piece. So then he swapped from 2-piece because he thought.
Well, there's 2 companies. Is it blue or red?
It's neither. It's a extra special side company. I won't throw them under the bus because
okay, that's fine. Okay.
Anyway, so he went to the solid rotor, so it was the rotor. He had the whole thing built so he could run like 370Z stock rotors or something like that, some bigger, larger rotor. So from a car that took a Brembo, so from the red group, that had an oversized single. And I think that oversized single made it one day at the track before it popped. Catastrophic.
Now, is he frying calipers or rotors?
Rotors. They are destroying themselves.
Like warping or like what is okay.
So he looks at them before he goes out. There's no major cracks. There's only very minute, temperature cracks, the hair, very, very small hairlines, right? And nothing protruding to the side. And then at some point in the afternoon session, shortly in the afternoon session, a huge, great gaping crack just occurs. And just like on his 2-piece like split. And so he thought the 2-piece was a little too small and with 2 different metals.
That's not, I wouldn't say. So, remember that if it's a decent 2-piece, like a not, Temu, like 2-piece kind of thing, like the actual rotor, the connections on it will float.
Right.
So that the hat, basically the hat will allow torque, but it'll allow radial expansion. So the differential on that is likely going to be less bad from a stress perspective than an actual single piece rotor.
Okay.
In terms of thermally induced stresses.
So that's good to know.
Okay. So I've fried some brakes. Okay. And I can name names on this one because they actually were decent about it. So way back when I was doing a lot of track days in my Audi. So this was a 4,000 pound car. I was making 400 and change horsepower at the time. And I was frying them because I was doing like Watkins Glen, which is wonderful for high horsepower cars that are really heavy because you can get going really, really, really fast. And then you have the bus stop and and all of a sudden you're going from, 140, 160 to 60.
Right.
And doing that repeatedly and you will fry stuff. So at the time I was running Stop Techs on there. I actually have worked with them a bunch. I would work with them a bunch on my DSM as well. So I warped a set of their rotors. Okay. And I was like, yeah, these are warped. And like, I did everything right. Like, I didn't like come into the pits and just sit there with the brakes on or anything weird like that. And so they actually they FedExed me a new set of rotors, like gratis. And as long as I sent them back the ones I broke, because they're like, we have no idea how the hell you did this, but like, we're going to find out. And one of the things it was just like, it was it was the right size kit for this, but it was a very specific situation where the brakes were relatively cold, because like if you've ever been to Watkins Glen, like through the S's and everything, basically you're not on the brakes for quite a while. Okay. And so your brakes are going to be nice and cool, and then they're going to go from very cold to very, very hot at the bus stop. Okay. And that spike was what was killing them, and actually causing a warp, was they were a lot of heat going into it. One thing that's characteristic, and I assume like your buddy isn't doing this, but like newbies will tend to fry brakes because they'll come to the pits and leave the brakes on.
Right.
Like you never want to be at zero speed with hot brakes and the brake pedal depressed. Like you will warp, that'll actually warp rotors and cause cracking, because brakes are really designed to be heated all the same. Because I mean, if you think about it, if it's spinning through the brake, it's all getting hot, but it's getting hot uniformly. Whereas if you have like hot brake pads on rotor, it's going to get really hot there and cold everywhere else, and that'll crack them like that. So if you ever see brake rotors where like it's like the moon, it's like a chunk taken out of it from the side, that's probably what happened, because basically they heated that section and it stress cracked around the side of it. In this case, like, is it a weird pad compound thing? Like it could be a variety of things.
He's working on it. I just wanted to see like what kind of thermodynamic stuff. Like, so you talked about a couple minutes ago going from too cold to too hot, and I think that's absolutely the case. And it's in the past on my first car, I think it caused some issues when I actually ducted my brakes, because you can duct your brakes and not actually need them to be ducted, because there is a thermal operating zone for your brakes. And if they're happy in there and then you overcool them, but there are an aggressive pad that will take heat right away, you'll start to cause problems. And so I just wanted to see what type of thermodynamic issues that may be occurring.
Oh yeah. So I mean, brakes are like everything else. You're heating them up, and then you have to get rid of the heat. Okay. Brakes and brake fluids is always it's always a fun topic. Like one of the big issues is brakes are always neglected. Like I would say suspension is neglected most by newbies in racing, followed by brakes, because everyone likes to make power and they can understand that. But like, it's brake, suspension is the thing that wins races, and then brakes are BMW used to have a slogan that the brakes need to be at least as powerful as the engine, like, or more preferably. Right. But they're one of the most thermally stressful parts of a car, especially depending upon the circuit. Like in autocross, for instance, where you have lots of braking close together, not a lot of time in between them, and the overall time period is low. Okay. Your brakes are never going to get that hot. Like you're never going that fast. You're not putting a lot of heat into the brakes. Right. It's kind of what they're designed to do anyway. If it's a street car, like bumper to bumper traffic, you're going from 10 to 15, or 10 to 0, 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 but not getting a lot of airflow. That's what they're designed for. Circuits where there's like a lot of distance and then hard braking are the most abrupt, or the most difficult on brakes, because they have to work when they're both cold right at the beginning and hot. Okay. So like you'll pick different pad compounds and stuff like that to run at different temperatures. So it's all really like you set it perfectly yourself, where it was, you have like the zone that they're happy at. Okay. Now, if you're getting like race pads, they're going to want to run hot, because the assumption is under most racing, you never really get a chance to cool the brakes down that much. I brought up Watkins because that's a perfect example. Le Mans is another super example of this as a problem, where you have the Muselon straight, where it's like you're going for a long ass time and then you have to stop. Like your brakes are cold, okay, going into that. So a lot of times they will run less ducting just so they can keep the temperature in, especially if it's carbon brakes, because those will not work when they're cold. So you will need less cooling just so you can keep the temperature in them for those kinds of circuits. Now, for most of the circuits are in the mid-Atlantic, maybe one of the configurations of EIR you might have this, but not really. Like there's enough braking around where you're going to keep a lot of good temperature in it. One way to test this is, I mean, if you really wanted to, you could have someone watch you come out of a braking zone with a thermal camera and see how hot the brakes were, or going into a zone. Like thermal, like a FLIR 1 is a couple $100. Put it on a phone, video it going in. You'll be able to see how hot the brakes were coming in. That's one way to do it. So, and like see if they're in their happy range. Like you'll know what turns your brakes feel best at. So if you did this, get your wife to video it or something, like, you'll be able to like see like, okay, this turn, the brakes felt really good in this braking zone and they were hot coming in. So like, I want them to be hot. And they weren't that bad coming out. Like I didn't get any fade or anything like that. So you want to keep them in the right range. But in terms of managing the temperature, it's just more or less airflow. Okay. Like brakes in almost every case are running, especially when you're racing, too hot. Okay. And people will pick different brake pads. People will spend enormous amounts of money on brake fluid that's somehow magic and doesn't boil or blah, 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 blah. Another interesting anecdote that'll follow up on this of like what everyone does wrong on brake fluid. But they won't like actually be determining if like that is the appropriate thing. Like if you're ducting the hell out of your brakes and they're running cool, you may want to run a less high temperature pad just so that, because they're never getting up to temperature. Another thing people will do is they'll direct, depending upon the actual brake disc layout, they'll direct the airflow wrong. Like I've seen this where there's like, oh, here's your brake shroud for your, like vented disc brakes. So you look at them from the side and it looks like a turbine kind of thing. And they'll make a shroud that goes on your upright and it'll direct the brake duct at the disc of the brake.
Right.
Okay. Like straight, like at the shiny part. And I'm like, no, for that, what you actually want is that's an air pump. Okay, you want to direct the air at the hub so that the brake disc spinning directs the air outward. It's flowing through the brake disc. But you'll see people with ventilated brakes, and they'll have a brake duct that's blowing the air at the shiny part. And I'm like, wow, that's a complete waste of your brake duct. Like, you want to put it into the hub. Kind of
yes. And your bearings will last longer, and thank you for it,
Oh, yeah. Yeah. And that's the other thing of like, when I was talking about like radiative heat transfer, your brakes are glowing. Okay. And that when something is glowing red hot, the amount of heat that can be just transported to the next surface is like putting a blowtorch on it. Okay. So when people cook wheel bearings in racing, like one of the dominant reasons for that is they're right next to the brakes. The brakes are now glowing red hot, but there's no airflow there. So like get it into the middle if you have ventilated discs. That's one thing. Another big thing, so just manage your airflow there. The other thing is look at wheels. A lot of times wheels will overly block air flow. So you kind of want to run big brakes. Like people will always try and get like the biggest brakes that can fit inside the wheel. And it's like, okay, well, the air has to leave the brake disc and, it'll be really close. And like, or there'll be other features of the upright that prevent airflow or from the brake disc leaving the wheel. And F1 now they're doing just crazy shit of airflow through hub and all kinds of neat stuff. In terms of like, wheels that pump air through brakes, and the axles are like hollow so they can blow air through it. It's just crazy. I love it. Brake fluid thing. Interesting thing. Like, how often do you in a racing season? How often do you swap brake fluid?
Once a year.
Like flush your brakes once a year. What do you use for brake fluid?
The Castrol, not sponsored. Castrol, whatever the racing fluid is,
like SRF or whatever their racing stuff is.
Yep.
Okay, so brake fluid. I don't know if you know this. Like that brake fluid will have what they call a wet boiling point and a dry boiling point for brake fluid. I assume you know this. Okay, so all the racing brake fluid has like really high. It'll be like 600 degree like dry boiling point, and it'll be like 550 degree wet boiling point and stuff like that. Okay. So the reason why that is as soon as you get any water in brake fluid, which is strongly hygroscopic, that absorbs water, is the boiling point goes down. Okay, so if you're racing and you haven't swapped brake fluid and it's been in the car for a while and you get mushy pedal, that's why. Like, there you go. It's just moisture in your brake fluid and that's what happens. Okay. If you're changing your brake fluid regularly, like once a year, and then you're just tracking it, kind of thing, like chances are there will never be water in your brake fluid. Like it's just not in there for years. So if you ever get a chance, look up what the dry boiling point of Ford truck brake fluid is. And
a lot of people use that. I can't remember what it's called.
Why?
Because it has a really good
Ford
dry
Super Duty brake fluid.
Yeah.
Yep. The reason why it does, like I talked, this is from a person at Ford, was old people drive big Fords. Old people ride brakes. Old people maintain cars well, though, so they never have wet brake fluid, but they boil the shit out of the dry brake fluid. So like, your grandma will ride the brakes in her Crown Vic basically and heat the crap out of the fluid, but, takes it to like the dealer once a year to get all the necessary things done. So Ford, like just off the shelf, a lot like Super Duty brake fluid will have the same dry boiling point as like the like $50 a liter, like crazy stuff. And the wet boiling point just basically doesn't matter for racing. So anyway, I used to only run the Ford stuff. Interesting anecdote, but it's because of old people.
Yeah. There were several, let's call them cheaper brands, because the Castrol stuff is $70 a liter, something like that.
Inflation.
Yeah, inflation. Yeah, great. Thanks, somebody. Leadership, whatever.
Yeah.
Anyway, but the Castrol stuff is even dry and wet
higher.
Is still way higher.
Yeah.
Than everybody else. So we sort of do it.
And I agree. Yeah.
We bleed them once a year and life is good. So
it's good insurance. Like, there's nothing wrong with running higher temperature fluid. There's absolutely nothing wrong with that. So in terms of like what's killing your friend's brakes, that's a weird one. Like, I mean, it's a heavy car, but the discs are big. Like, is it circuit dependent or?
No, it hasn't been. He went even bigger. So they were big in diameter initially, but they seemed a little thin. So he went a little thicker.
Okay.
And more diameter, I believe. So he's messing around to see if it was just single capacity, because he's not running the same pads he used to run. He had to go a little more aggressive because the car is about 500 or 600 pounds heavier than his old car. So he bumped up a series, I believe. And then, she's a big girl, man. She's thick. And,
but also like a lot of that weight was added to the front. So weight balance is going to be different, right?
Yeah, but we're all front wheel drive dummies. So,
I know, but it means that like whatever, like your front brakes are going to be, it's just even more.
Right.
That's really interesting. Thickness will matter. But like the cracking is just, that's like, that tells me that there's something differential happening. So like, I mean, if you want to bring it back to like thermodynamics, like, materials expand and contract with temperature. Like if something is heated rapidly, that causes problems, but also if it's heated kind of asymmetrically. Okay. So like, so let's say you went to like a larger diameter single piece rotor. Mm-hmm. So let's say they're both single piece rotors. It's just one big hunk of steel. Okay. And you went bigger. Well, the pad contact area likely didn't change that much. Like say your caliper, you had the same calipers, just bigger rotor. Okay. So now like I have this big piece of steel, but the middle is cold and the outside is hot. I'm by making the rotor bigger, I'm increasing the area of the cold part and the hot part, the annulus is the thick, the
Okay, I see
inner
what
to
you're
outer
saying.
diameter.
Yeah.
So in effect, like now it's like I'm pinching it more. Like I have a even colder part in the middle because it's farther from the hot part. So it's like, almost like a pucker could happen. So you might get the stress in the metal from the inside to the outside. That difference is going to be a lot more.
Okay.
And you might get more stress cracking because of that. But I like on two-piece, it shouldn't matter that much at all, because as the rotor gets bigger, the annular thickness, like the width of the shiny part, stays the same. Like it's just bigger middle part. Okay, because two-piece rotors, trying to reduce weight there, so you want the middle is just aluminum, so you want the steel part to be the minimum width of just the pads, effectively. So the other thing to look at is it 4-piston calipers or is it a sliding?
I think he was
like
on 4 pistons, and now I was going to look him up while we were talking on Instagram. I think he just bought a 6-piston setup.
Make sure that
he's aware of his piston size.
Okay. Well, also make sure that that he's not getting any binding on one side or the other. Like if the caliper is malpositioned, or if the inside or the outside pistons are pushing asymmetrically, you will get heating on more on one side of the rotor than the other.
Okay.
And that could very easily cause problems. Same with cooling. Like the reason also for blowing the air down the inside out is you're not having a cold, like if you imagine like the bad kind of duct where it's just blowing on the inside shiny part. Well, that means that the side of the disc facing the car is going to be much cooler than the side of the disc facing the outside. And there you're bending it the wrong way kind of thing. So, but that sounds to me like a thermal problem, basically, of like differential heating in some way. So there you go. All comes down to heat and where it goes and what you're doing with it.
And how to get it out safely. So, all right, Mark. Well,
giving me interesting.
Yeah, I'll give you some stuff to think about, when you're on the John or something. Not that you don't have lots of work to do on your own. But
no, I've just been lately playing a lot of video games. I got enough thinking to do at work.
Yeah.
So.
All right, man. Well, I appreciate you coming on.
Cool.
I'm sure there'll be another version, and we'll try to figure out something. Maybe I'll bring some more real world problems your way, and we can talk about that. Yeah.
If any of your listeners have like thermal questions of like how does bring it on. Like I don't mind doing this in a month or two if you got a bunch of questions and we could talk more. I'd love to.
Okay. Do you want them to reach out directly to you?
No, I'll reach out through you.
Okay, that's fine. Yeah. I'll be your filter.
Make a list of questions. If it's like, next thermal episode, fan questions, that'd be cool.
Yeah. I'm awesome. Yeah, we'll definitely do that. Thanks for your time, because we took a lot of it.
Until next time, keep working on yourself, keep working on the car, and let's get faster.